Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I've been debating whether or not to post this, but after talking to a few friends, I realized I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here could help me make sense of it. This happened about a year ago, and it still gives me chills. I live in a relatively quiet town. Nothing exciting ever happens here, so I've always felt safe going for late night walks. There's something calming about the stillness of the night, you know. It was one of those nights when I couldn't sleep, so I threw on my hoodie and decided to take a stroll around my neighborhood. It was around 11:30 p.m., chilly, but not unbearably so. The streets were empty except for the occasional porch light casting long shadows. About 15 minutes into my walk, I noticed someone up ahead. He was standing under a flickering streetlight, not moving, just standing there. It was odd, but I figured he might just be waiting for a ride or something. As I got closer, I realized he wasn't standing still. He was swaying ever so slightly. I slowed down. Something about him felt off. He was dressed normally, jeans, a dark jacket, nothing remarkable, but his posture was strange, almost unnatural. And then I saw his face. He was smiling, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was too wide, too strained, like his face didn't know how to do anything else. His eyes, they didn't match the smile. They were wide, unblinking, and cold, like he was watching something far away, or maybe me. I thought about crossing the street, but I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I kept walking, keeping my pace steady, my hands shoved in my pockets. As I passed him, I mumbled a quick evening, hoping it would make the situation less weird. He didn't respond. He just turned his head to follow me as I walked past, that smile never faltering. His eyes locked on mine, and I swear in that split second, I felt like he could see right through me. I picked up my pace, trying not to look back, but then I heard footsteps. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. Maybe I was overreacting, but the sound was unmistakable, soft, deliberate steps, matching my rhythm. I glanced over my shoulder. He was following me, still smiling. My heart started racing. I told myself to stay calm, that he was probably just heading in the same direction. But when I turned the corner onto my street, he did too. By this point, I was practically jogging. My house was only a few blocks away, and all I could think about was getting inside and locking the door. I didn't dare look back again. When I reached my driveway, I sprinted to the door, fumbling with my keys. I threw the door open, slammed it shut, and locked it. My chest was heaving as I pressed my back against the door, straining to hear if he was still out there. Nothing, just silence. I peeked through the peephole. The street was empty, no sign of him. I told myself I was safe, but something didn't feel right. I couldn't shake the image of that smile, those eyes. I checked all the windows, locked every door, and eventually forced myself to go to bed. The next morning, I decided to check my front yard. Maybe it was paranoia, but I needed to make sure everything was fine. That's when I saw it. On the sidewalk, just outside my house, was a single muddy footprint. It was facing my door. That single footprint haunted me for days. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my family, because I didn't want to sound like a lunatic who leaves one footprint and disappears. It didn't make sense. I avoided my nighttime walks after that. Honestly, I didn't even like leaving my house after sunset. For a few weeks, things felt normal again, and I started convincing myself that maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe he wasn't following me. Maybe the footprint was a coincidence. But then, it happened again. It was a Saturday night, and I'd been up late watching a movie. Around midnight, I decided to head to bed. I was turning off the lights in the living room when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Someone was standing on the sidewalk, just outside the glow of the streetlight. My stomach dropped. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. The curtains were half closed, and maybe I was seeing shadows from the trees. But when I looked closer, I saw him. The same man, the same too wide smile, the same unblinking eyes. He was standing perfectly still, facing my house like he was waiting for something. I froze. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. Should I call the police? Turn on all the lights? Confront him? Before I could decide, he did something that made my blood run cold. He raised his hand and waved. It wasn't a normal wave, though. It was slow, deliberate, almost mocking, like he knew I was watching, and he wanted me to know that he knew. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The operator answered, and I blurted out what was happening. They assured me that an officer would be dispatched to check the area. When I worked up the courage to look outside again, he was gone. The police arrived about 15 minutes later, but by then, there was no sign of him. They did a quick patrol of the neighborhood and found nothing. One of the officers suggested it might have been a prank or a misunderstanding, but I knew better. That night, I barely slept. note. Every creak and shadow in the house felt like him lurking, waiting. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing other strange things. A door that I swore I'd locked would be slightly ajar. Objects in my house would be in different places that I'd left them. Once, I came home to find a single light bulb unscrewed just enough that it wouldn't turn on. But the worst was the notes. The first one appeared about a month after the night he stood outside my house. It was slipped under my front door, a plain piece of paper with 3 words scrawled in jagged handwriting. I'm still here. The second note came a few days later, taped to my bedroom window. This one was worse. It said, "I like watching you." I don't know how he got close enough to my window without me noticing. I finally broke down and told my best friend everything. She insisted I stay at her place for a while, and I didn't argue. I've been here for 2 weeks now, and nothing strange has happened. I'm finally starting to feel a little safer. But last night, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something outside her apartment. A single muddy footprint facing her front door. I stared at the footprint outside her door for what felt like an eternity. My mind raced with a million thoughts, each one worse than the last. How did he find me here? How long had he been watching? I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my friend's living room with every light in the apartment on, clutching a kitchen knife like it was some sort of talisman. My friend, bless her, tried to comfort me, but I could tell she was just as freaked out as I was. The next morning, she suggested we go to the police again, and this time, I agreed. We took photos of the footprint and told the officer everything, from the man's eerie behavior to the notes to the unexplained changes in my home. The officer listened patiently, but I could tell from her expression that she didn't believe me entirely. "We'll file a report and keep an eye out in the area," she said. It wasn't exactly comforting. For the next few days, I stayed at my friend's place, trying to convince myself that maybe he'd finally stop. Maybe he'd move on. But deep down, I knew better. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. with an uneasy feeling. The apartment was silent, but something felt wrong. I got up to check the locks on the doors and windows, as I've been doing obsessively every night. That's when I saw it. On the sliding glass door to my friend's small balcony, there was a handprint. It was faint but unmistakable, pressed against the glass, fingers splayed, as if someone had been leaning in to peer inside. I froze. My friend's apartment was on the 3rd floor. I shook her awake, panic flooding my voice as I showed her the handprint. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was left there by someone earlier, or maybe it was nothing. But I could see the fear in her eyes. The next morning, we called the landlord and had security cameras installed outside her apartment. We thought this would give us some peace of mind, but it only made things worse. The first night the cameras were up, we didn't catch anything unusual. But on the second night, we reviewed the footage and found something that made my blood turn to ice. At around 3:15 a.m., the man appeared. He walked right up to the front door of the apartment building, stared at the camera for a moment, and smiled. It was the same unsettling, too wide smile I'd seen before. He stood there for a few minutes, just staring, before turning and walking away. We showed the footage to the police, but they didn't have much to go on. He didn't touch anything, didn't leave any evidence. It was like he wanted to be seen but knew exactly how far he could push without getting caught. I've moved 3 times since then, and I've changed my phone number, email, everything. I've done everything I can think of to disappear. But sometimes, late at night, I still get that feeling, that prickling on the back of my neck, like I'm being watched. And every once in a while, I'll find something out of place. A door unlocked that I know I locked, a single footprint in the dirt outside my window, and I wonder, how far can I run before he catches up? This happened to me a few years ago, and to this day, I can't fully explain it. It was my first time living alone. I had just moved into a small studio apartment downtown, one of those older buildings with creaky floors and big, single-pane windows that let in every sound from the street below. It wasn't fancy, but it was cheap, and I was excited to have my own space. The first few nights were uneventful, aside from getting used to the weird noises an old building makes. But on the 4th night, something happened that still gives me chills. It was around 1 a.m. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling on my phone with the TV on for background noise. The window behind me was open just a crack to let in some air. Suddenly, I heard a faint tapping sound. I froze, thinking it was just my imagination or maybe a branch hitting the glass. But then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. I turned down the TV and listened. It was definitely coming from the window. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe a bird or some loose wiring. Still, I felt uneasy. Trying to act casual, I got up and walked toward the kitchen, which gave me a better view of the window from the side. That's when I saw him. A man was standing on the fire escape, staring right into my apartment. He was completely still, his face partially obscured by the shadows. All I could make out was his shape, tall and thin, with something off about the way he stood, like his joints didn't bend quite right. I tried to tell myself it was just a neighbor or a drunk guy who climbed up there by mistake. I cleared my throat, hoping he'd realize I saw him and go away, but instead, he just tilted his head like he was curious. Then he smiled. It was an enormous smile, his mouth stretched too wide, almost unnaturally so. so. That was when I realized he wasn't drunk or confused. He was watching me. I grabbed my phone and backed away toward the front door, keeping my eyes on him the whole time. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. As I pressed the call button, he started moving slowly at first, then faster. He didn't try to get into the window. Instead, he climbed up the fire escape, disappearing onto the roof. The police arrived within minutes, but of course, there was no sign of him. They checked the fire escape and the roof but found nothing. The officers told me it was probably a homeless guy or some prankster, but they didn't look convinced. I ended up staying at a friend's place for a few nights after that, and I moved out of that apartment within a month. A month after I moved out, I thought the nightmare was over. My new apartment was in a nicer building, higher up, with no fire escapes. It had been a hassle breaking my lease, but I couldn't bring myself to stay in that old place. The nights were quiet again, and I felt like I could finally breathe, until I heard the tapping again. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. I was lying in bed late one night, trying to fall asleep, when I heard it tap, tap, tap. It was coming from my bedroom window on the 8th floor. My heart stopped. I told myself it was impossible. There was no fire escape, no balcony, no way for anyone or anything to be out there. I stayed frozen in bed, every muscle in my body tensed, listening. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window. The blinds were drawn, but the outline of something or someone was pressed against them. The shadow of a hand, fingers too long and thin to be human, ran down the slats. I sat up, clutching my blanket, and stared, trying to convince myself I was dreaming. Then the shadow moved, shifting unnaturally as if it were crawling sideways across the glass. The tapping started again, louder this time. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, hands shaking as I dialed 911. I could barely get the words out as I told the operator someone was outside my window. She sounded calm, but I could hear the edge of doubt in her voice when I said I was on the 8th floor. Stayed on the line, she said, "We'll send someone right away." As I waited, I couldn't take my eyes off the window. The shadow stayed still, as if it knew I was watching. Then, without warning, it began to shift. The blinds bulged inward, like something was pushing against them, trying to get in. I bolted for the front door, phone still in my hand, and ran into the hallway. I didn't stop until I was outside, barefoot and shivering in the cold night air. The police arrived within minutes, and when they searched my apartment, they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints on the window ledge, nothing to suggest anyone had been there, but I knew what I saw. And the next morning, I found something that made my blood run cold. On the outside of the window, written in the fog of condensation, were 3 words: "I found you." I stared at those words, frozen in place. My first instinct was to run, to get as far away as possible, but something about the message held me there like a rabbit caught in a predator's gaze. "I found you." The handwriting wasn't messy or rushed. Each letter was deliberate, precise, almost elegant. But how could anyone have written it? The window ledge outside was barely wide enough to fit a bird. I didn't go to work that day. I spent hours obsessively checking the windows, my locks, the peephole on my door. Every creak of the building, every passing shadow outside sent my heart racing. I called a locksmith and had every lock in the apartment replaced. I even taped down the edges of the windows, as if that would somehow keep whatever it was out. For a week, nothing happened. I convinced myself that I was overreacting, that maybe it had been some strange prank. I didn't sleep well, but I started to regain a sense of normalcy, until the power went out. It was late again, close to midnight. I was on my couch watching TV when everything went dark. The silence was immediate and suffocating. No hum of the fridge, no street lights glowing through the window, just pitch black. I grabbed my phone, using its flashlight to navigate. I tried to tell myself it was just a regular power outage, but I knew, something was wrong. Then I heard it, not tapping this time, scraping, like nails dragging across metal. The sound was coming from the window in the living room. I turned the flashlight toward it, and my stomach dropped. The blinds were open, and something was pressed against the glass. It was him, the same man, or thing, I'd seen on the fire escape at my old apartment. His face was clearer this time, and it was wrong. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over sharp bones. His eyes were wide and unblinking, and his mouth, that awful, too wide smile. He didn't move. He just stared at me through the glass, his head tilted in that same curious way, as if he were studying me. And then, slowly, he raised a hand. His fingers, impossibly long and thin, tapped on the glass. Once, twice, 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. I backed away, shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, the room was plunged into darkness. When the light came back on, the window was empty. I thought he was gone, but then I heard a noise that made my blood turn to ice. It was coming from behind me, a low, raspy whisper so faint I could barely make it out. "You can't hide from me." I ran. I didn't stop to grab my keys or even my shoes. I just threw open the door and bolted down the hallway. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if he was following me. I spent the night at a 24-hour diner, too scared to go home. When morning came, I returned with a friend, but the apartment was exactly how I left it. No signs of a break-in, no scratches on the window. Just one thing was different. On my coffee table, where I knew I hadn't left anything, was a single piece of paper, written in the same precise handwriting as before with 4 new words. See you again soon. Hi everyone, this is my first post here, and honestly, I've been debating whether to share this because it still gives me chills just thinking about it, but maybe getting it out will help me move on. This happened about a year ago when I was living in a city for an internship. My apartment was nothing special, but it had a small underground parking garage. It was dimly lit, had those flickery fluorescent lights, and always seemed eerily quiet, like the kind of quiet that makes you hyper aware of your own breathing. One night, I was coming back late from a work event. It must have been around 11:30 p.m. and I was exhausted. I parked my car in my usual spot near the elevator, grabbed my stuff, and started walking toward the elevator doors when I heard a faint tapping sound. It wasn't loud, but in that dead silence, it stood out. Tap, tap, tap. I froze for a moment and looked around. The garage was nearly empty, except for a few cars scattered here and there. My first thought was maybe something fell over in one of the other cars, but then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it sounded closer, like it was echoing off the walls. I tried to shake it off as my overactive imagination and continued toward the elevator. That's when I saw him, a man standing at the far end of the garage, right where the light flickered the most. He was tall and thin, dressed in what looked like an oversized hoodie and jeans. I couldn't make out his face because of the shadow cast by the hood, but he wasn't moving, just standing there. I tried not to panic and pressed the elevator button, keeping my eyes on him out of the corner of my vision. The tapping sound started again, but this time, it was unmistakably coming from his direction. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't until then that I realized he wasn't tapping on something. He was tapping his fingers against his own leg, almost rhythmically. The elevator finally dinged, and I rushed inside, pressing the button for my floor. As the doors started to close, I risked one last glance at him. He wasn't tapping anymore. Instead, he had turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see his face, or lack of one. His skin was pale, almost grayish, and his eyes, they didn't look human. They were too big, too dark, like empty sockets that somehow stared straight through me. The door shut, and I slammed the close door button repeatedly, even though it was already closing. The elevator ride felt like an eternity, and when I got to my floor, I practically sprinted to my apartment, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept imagining those empty eyes staring at me through the window. The next morning, I went down to the garage to check my car, and of course, the man was gone. But there was something on the hood of my car, a single, dirty handprint, larger than any human hand I've ever seen. I reported it to the building manager, who shrugged it off, saying it was probably a homeless guy trying to scare people, but I knew what I saw. I moved out a few months later, but I still park on the street whenever I can. I never want to step foot in another underground garage. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Even in broad daylight, I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder. It didn't help that every time I used the garage after that, I felt like the air got heavier, like it was suffocating me. Nothing unusual happened for a few weeks, but the unease never went away. One Friday night, I stayed late at work to finish up a big project. By the time I got home, it was after midnight and the garage was eerily empty again. I took a deep breath before pulling in and parked as close to the elevator as I could. The thought of walking across the garage alone made my stomach churn. This time, I tried to be smart. I had my keys ready in one hand and my phone in the other. As soon as I got out of the car, I scanned the area. No one was there, but the tapping sound was back. Tap, tap, tap. It was faint, almost like it was teasing me. I told myself it was just paranoia and forced myself to walk toward the elevator. But halfway there, I realized the tapping wasn't random. It had a rhythm, like some twisted little song. And worse, it was following me. Every step I took, the tapping seemed to match it. I sped up, practically running the last few feet to the elevator, and hit the button repeatedly. The tapping stopped. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but then I heard something else, breathing. Slow, raspy breathing, coming from just behind me. I didn't dare turn around. The elevator doors finally opened, and I rushed inside, slamming the close door button like my life depended on it. Just as the doors started to close, a shadow moved across the floor outside. I caught a glimpse of something crouched low, its limbs unnaturally long and bent, like it was crawling on all fours. Its face, if you could call it that, was grotesque, with wide, empty eyes and a grin that stretched too far, showing rows of jagged, yellow teeth. The door shut before it could reach me, and I collapsed against the wall, shaking. I rode the elevator to my floor, but this time, I didn't rush to my apartment. Instead, I stood in the hallway, staring at the glowing number above the door, waiting to see if the elevator would move again. It didn't. I finally forced myself to go inside and lock every possible possible entrance. I even pushed my couch in front of the door for good measure. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the corner of my living room with a kitchen knife in hand, jumping at every creak and groan the building made. The next morning, I went down to the garage to get my car and found another handprint, bigger and darker than before, smeared across my driver's side window. I didn't even bother cleaning it off. I drove straight to a friend's place and stayed there until I could break my lease and move out. I still don't know what I saw that night. Life went back to normal, or at least I tried to convince myself it did. After I moved out of that apartment, I stayed with a friend for a while, then found a new place in a completely different part of the city. It was a small studio on the third floor of a busy building, no parking garages, no long, shadowy hallways. It was perfect, or so I thought. For months, nothing happened. I never heard the tapping again, and I started to believe that maybe whatever I had seen or imagined in that garage was behind me. I stopped obsessively checking over my shoulder and even convinced myself to park in an above ground lot near my new place. I was fine until last week. It started small. I woke up one night to a soft thudding sound coming from the wall behind my bed. At first, I thought it was my neighbors moving furniture, but it was rhythmic. Steady, tap, tap, tap. My heart sank. It was so faint that I almost convinced myself I was dreaming, but then it stopped abruptly, like someone realized they'd been caught. The next morning, I checked the wall. Nothing. No marks. No explanation. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that had crept back into my chest. I brushed it off and told myself it was just the building settling or maybe my overactive imagination. But then, the tapping started again. Not every night, and never at the same time, but sometimes it would come from the wall, sometimes from the window, and once, terrifyingly, from the ceiling. Always faint, always rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. A few nights ago, it escalated. I had just gotten home late from work and was getting ready for bed when I heard it. This time, it wasn't coming from the walls, it was coming from my front door. My blood ran cold as the taps grew louder and more deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I stared at the door, frozen, trying to convince myself it was a prank or maybe a delivery person at the wrong apartment. But then came the voice, a low, guttural whisper, barely audible through the door. Let me in. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The tapping resumed, faster now, more insistent. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, but eventually it stopped. I waited, straining to hear any sound, but there was nothing. Finally, I forced myself to check the peephole, but the hallway was empty. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found something outside my door, a single blackened handprint smudged across the wood, just like the one I'd seen on my car back in that garage. I've been staying with friends since then, trying to figure out what to do. I can't go back to that apartment. I don't think it's safe. But here's the thing that terrifies me the most. Wherever I go, whatever I do, it feels like it's getting closer. Last night, I stayed at my best friend's house. She lives in a quiet neighborhood, miles from my place, and I thought I'd finally get a decent night's sleep. But around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of tapping on her bedroom window. I didn't look. I couldn't. I don't know what it wants or why it's following me, but I know this much, it's not going to stop. Creepy tapping creature, let's not meet again. But I know you will. So this happened about 2 months ago, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I've told a few close friends, but they all say I should forget about it and move on. Easier said than done. Maybe writing it out will help. For context, I worked a late shift at a 24-hour diner in a pretty quiet part of town. I like the peace. Most nights, it's just regulars and the occasional trucker. But this one night was different. It was a little after 2 a.m., and the place was dead. No customers, no cars in the lot, just the hum of the fridge and the faint buzz of the overhead lights. I was leaning on the counter, scrolling through my phone, when the front door creaked open. I looked up, expecting one of the usuals, but instead, a man stepped in. He was tall and thin, almost unnaturally so, with a face that seemed a little off. His features were sharp, but not in a good way, like they didn't quite fit together. He wasn't dressed for the weather either. It was freezing outside, but he had on a thin hoodie and jeans. Just coffee, he said, his voice low and raspy. He sat at the farthest booth, in the darkest corner of the diner, even though the whole place was empty. Something about him made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. People are weird sometimes, right? As I poured his coffee, I noticed the lights flicker. Not unusual. The wiring in the diner is ancient, but it made my stomach twist anyway. I brought the coffee over, and he didn't even look up, just stared down at the table. His hands were pale and thin, and his nails looked almost flawed. I told myself I was imagining things. Anything else? I asked, forcing a smile. He didn't answer, just turned his head slightly, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I backed away and went behind the counter, trying trying to focus on restocking the napkins or literally anything to keep me distracted. But I kept sneaking glances at him. He wasn't drinking the coffee. He wasn't moving at all, just sitting there staring. After about 10 minutes, the bell above the door jingled, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Another man walked in, older, dressed in a suit that looked expensive but outdated, like something from the 70 seconds. He froze when he saw the guy in the booth. Then, without a word, he turned and left. That was when I noticed something I hadn't before. The guy in the booth wasn't casting a shadow. The overhead lights were directly above him, but the booth and the floor around him were empty. My heart started pounding, and I did what any rational person would do. I pretended everything was fine. I stayed behind the counter, counting the seconds until my coworker's shift started at 3 a.m. The guy still didn't move, didn't drink his coffee, didn't acknowledge me in any way. At 2:58, the lights flickered again, this time harder. The hum of the fridge stopped, leaving the diner in eerie silence. I froze, waiting for the power to come back. When the lights returned, the booth was empty. The coffee cup was still full, steam rising from it, but the man was gone. I rushed to the front door and locked it, not caring about the 24-hour policy. My coworker showed up a few minutes later, annoyed that I wouldn't unlock the door until I saw it was empty. I didn't tell him what happened. I just said I wasn't feeling well and left. For weeks after that night, I kept replaying the encounter in my head, trying to make sense of it. Was it just my imagination, sleep deprivation? But the memory of his shadowless figure, the unnatural way he sat there so still, wouldn't let me forget. I avoided the booth like it was cursed, which, at this point, didn't seem like a stretch. My coworkers noticed. One night, Sam, the cook, asked me why I wouldn't refill the ketchup bottles over there anymore. I just shrugged and said, "Bad vibes." He laughed and called me superstitious, but I didn't care. About a month later, something else happened. It was another slow night. The clock had just hit 1 a.m., and the diner was quiet except for the sound of a late-night talk show playing faintly on the small TV above the counter. A young couple came in and took a seat in the middle of the diner, far away from that booth. I was grateful for the distraction and quickly went over to take their order. They were sweet, probably in their early 20s, laughing and whispering to each other. It was the kind of normalcy I needed to shake off the lingering dread of that corner booth. I brought them their food, refilled their drinks, and tried to convince myself that everything was fine. Then the bell above the door jingled. I turned around, and my stomach dropped. It was him, the shadowless man. He looked the same as before, too tall, too thin, and wearing the same threadbare hoodie despite the biting cold outside. His sharp, mismatched features seemed even more pronounced under the harsh fluorescent lights. Without looking at me, he walked straight to the booth. This time, I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the floor as I watched him slide into the seat. He didn't acknowledge me or the couple, just sat there, motionless like before. The couple must have sensed my discomfort because they turned to look at the booth. The girl frowned. "Is that booth even open?" she asked. "It looks weird." Before I could answer, the lights flickered. Not just a quick buzz, it was a full-on blackout for a second or two. When the lights came back, the couple gasped. The man was gone, but something wasn't right. The booth ... it looked wrong. The fabric of the seat was darker, almost like it was burnt, and there was something on the table, a small, folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I forced myself to walk over and pick it up. The paper was ice cold, and the writing on it looked like it had been scratched into the surface with something sharp. It read, "You're next." I dropped it like it burned me and stepped back, my heart racing. The couple, sensing my panic, stood up quickly. "What's going on?" the guy asked, his voice shaky. "I don't know," I whispered, barely able to speak. "But you need to leave." No, they didn't argue. They grabbed their things and left, glancing over their shoulders as they walked out. I locked the door behind them, even though it was way too early to close. I didn't care about breaking policy. I just wanted to feel safe. When I turned back to the booth, the paper was gone. The burn mark on the seat, though, that was still there. And I swear, as I stood there staring, I heard something faint, like a low, guttural chuckle coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. I quit the diner the next morning, told my boss I couldn't handle the night shifts anymore and walked out for good. I thought quitting the diner would be the end of it. I thought walking away from that booth, that man, and that cursed place would give me peace. But I was wrong. The nightmares started almost immediately. At first, they were vague, just flashes of the diner's fluorescent lights flickering, the booth sitting in silence, and the sensation of being watched. But over time, they became more vivid. I'd see the shadowless man sitting there, his clawed fingers drumming on the table, his mismatched eyes locking onto mine, and then he would smile. That smile wasn't human. It was too wide, too sharp, like his face was stretching beyond what it was supposed to do. In my dreams, I could feel him watching me, even when I turned away. The worst part, when I'd wake up, my room felt colder, like something had been there, lingering just out of sight. I tried everything to shake the feeling, counseling, therapy, meditation, even burning sage. Nothing worked. Every night, the dreams got worse, and then things started happening while I was awake. One night, I was home alone, watching TV to distract myself when the power flickered. My heart immediately started racing, and I grabbed my phone to turn on the flashlight. That's when I saw it. On the window, written in fog, were the words, "You can't run. I live on the second floor." No one could have reached that window from the outside. I barely slept that night, and when I did, the dream was different. I wasn't in the diner anymore. I was in my apartment, standing in my bedroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. But the reflection wasn't me. It was him, the shadowless man, grinning back at me with those razor-sharp teeth. He whispered something I couldn't quite make out, but I woke up with the words echoing in my mind, "I'm coming." A few nights later, I decided I couldn't stay in the apartment anymore. I packed a bag and went to stay with my friend Emily. She didn't ask too many questions, just let me crash on her couch. I felt safer there for a while, until Emily saw him too. It was around 3 a.m., and we were both still awake, watching bad reality TV and eating popcorn. Out of nowhere, Emily froze, her eyes fixed on the living room window. "Who the hell was that?" she whispered. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to look, but I forced myself to. Standing outside, barely visible in the dim streetlight, was a tall, thin figure. His face was shadowed, but I knew it was him. He was just standing there, perfectly still, staring up at the window. Emily grabbed her phone to call the police, but as soon as she turned away, the figure was gone. No sound, no movement, just gone. When the cops arrived, they didn't find anything. No footprints, no sign anyone had been there. Emily didn't let me stay after that. She said she wasn't mad, just scared. "Whatever this is," she said, "it's following you. I just can't. I don't know what to do anymore. It's like he's everywhere. I see him in the corners of my vision, a reflections that vanish when I turn to look. Lights flicker no matter where I go. And last night, I found something on my kitchen table, a small, folded piece of paper just like the one in the diner. My hands were shaking as I opened it. It said, 'You're next.' I don't know what he wants or why he's after me, but I'm starting to think there's no escaping him. If you've ever felt that chill, like someone is watching you when you're alone, or if your lights flicker at odd hours, leave. Bruh, don't look back, because once he notices you, it's already too late." This happened to me about 2 years ago, and I still get chills every time I think about it. For context, I'm a 24-year-old woman who lives in a mid-sized city. I've always been cautious, especially since I work late shifts at a diner. Most nights, I'd walk the few blocks home with my keys between my fingers, constantly scanning my surroundings. But no amount of vigilance could have prepared me for this encounter. It was a Tuesday night, or technically Wednesday morning, and my shift had been brutal. By the time I clocked out, it was nearly 2 a.m., and the streets were eerily quiet. The air was thick with fog, the kind that makes streetlights look like floating orbs. I was halfway home when I noticed him, this man in a bright red jacket. At first, I thought it was odd because the jacket was too bright, almost glowing against the muted gray of the fog. He was standing on the opposite side of the street, facing me but not moving. I glanced at him quickly, trying not to make eye contact, and kept walking. After a few seconds, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. The man in the red jacket was still on the opposite side of the street, standing completely still. I told myself I was imagining things and quickened my pace. When I turned the corner onto my street, I looked over my shoulder again. He wasn't on the opposite side anymore. He was standing directly under a street light, just a few yards away. His face was hidden by the shadow of his hood, but I could feel his eyes on me. The strangest part, I hadn't heard him cross the street. Panic set in. I fumbled with my phone, pretending to make a call, hoping it would deter him. "Hey, yeah, I'm almost home. Can you meet me outside?" I said loudly, trying to keep my voice steady. That's when he laughed. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was high-pitched, almost childlike, and it echoed unnaturally in the empty street. I bolted. My apartment building was just ahead, and I could see the faint light of the lobby. As I ran, I could hear the laugh following me, getting louder and louder, even though I couldn't hear any footsteps. When I reached the building, I fumbled with my keys, praying I could get the door open before he caught up. Finally, the lock clicked, and I threw myself inside, slamming the door behind me. My heart was pounding as I turned to look through the glass door. He was standing right outside, his hood now pulled back. His face was pale, almost glowing in the dim light, with wide, unblinking eyes and a grin that stretched too far. He pressed his hand against the glass, and I swear, his fingers left smudges even though I never heard the door creak. I backed away, my hands shaking, and grabbed my phone to call the police. When I looked up again, he was gone. The police arrived quickly, but there was no sign of him. They said it was probably a drunk or someone trying to scare me, but I knew it wasn't that simple. I moved out of that apartment a few months later. For a while after I moved, things seemed to return to normal. The new apartment was in a busier part of town, and I felt safer surrounded by more people and noise. I even convinced myself that the encounter with the man in the red jacket was some bizarre one-off experience, a prank or some creepy loner who decided to scare me for fun. But then, about 6 months later, I started seeing him again. The first time was at the grocery store. I was in the frozen food aisle, debating between two brands of pizza when I felt it, that prickling sensation you get when someone is staring at you. I looked up, and there he was, standing at the other end of the aisle. Same bright red jacket, same hood covering his face. This time, though, there was no fog, no shadows to play tricks on my mind. He was as real as the pizzas in my hands. I froze, unsure of what to do. He didn't move, just stood there, his head slightly tilted, like he was waiting for me to make the first move. I forced myself to act normal, abandoning the pizza and heading toward the front of the store. I didn't look back, but I could feel his presence, like an invisible tether pulling at my spine. I left the store as quickly as I could, practically running to my car. As I fumbled with my keys, I glanced around the parking lot. He wasn't there. I got in, locked the doors, and drove home, heart pounding the entire way. After that, I started seeing him everywhere. At first, it was sporadic. He'd be across the street while I was walking to work or standing on the platform at the train station. But then, it became more frequent. Once, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw him standing under the streetlight outside my bedroom window, staring up at me. I stopped sleeping properly after that. I tried to convince myself it was just some random guy who happened to own the same jacket. But deep down, I knew better. There was something wrong about him, something unnatural. No matter where I saw him, he always seemed out of place, like he didn't belong in this world. The final straw came a few weeks ago. I was on the subway, coming home from a late shift, when I noticed him sitting a few rows down. This time, he wasn't alone. He was surrounded by other passengers, but no one seemed to notice him. They were all scrolling on their phones, chatting, or staring out the windows, completely oblivious to the man in the red jacket. He turned his head slowly, locking eyes with me. For the first time, I could see his face clearly. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent, and his eyes. They were completely black, like bottomless pits. His mouth stretched into that same impossibly wide grin, and I swear I heard his laughter even over the noise of the train. I got off at the next stop, even though it wasn't mine, and ran straight to the station attendant. I begged them to check the security footage, convinced that someone had to see this guy following me. They were hesitant, but eventually agreed to help. The footage showed me sitting on the train, although it's been a week since I last saw him. I've been staying inside as much as possible, working remotely, and only going out when absolutely necessary. I've even been crashing at my friend Clara's place a few nights a week because I can't handle being alone in my apartment anymore. She's been supportive, but I can tell she thinks I'm overreacting. Last night, I stayed at my place because I thought maybe it was over. Maybe he'd finally moved on, or maybe I was just losing my mind. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that the footage from the train proved it was just paranoia. I was wrong. It started with a knock on my door at exactly 3 a.m. I froze in bed, clutching my blanket like it was some kind of shield. No one comes to my door at that hour, especially in this neighborhood. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a voice. Let me in. It was soft, almost playful, but unmistakably his voice. That same high-pitched, childlike tone I'd heard the first night I saw him. My blood ran cold. I didn't move, didn't breathe, hoping he'd think I wasn't home. But then, I heard it. The doorknob rattled. Come on, the voice whispered. I just want to talk. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands, whispering to the operator that someone was trying to break in. They told me to stay on the line and hide until officers arrived. I grabbed a kitchen knife and locked myself in the bathroom, heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. The knocking stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then I heard it, his laughter. It echoed through the apartment, coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was in my ears, in my head, in my bones. The operator was still on the line, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't respond. My voice was gone. I was paralyzed by fear. Then the laughter stopped, and the apartment went completely silent. Minutes felt like hours until I finally heard the police banging on my door. When they came in, they found no sign of forced entry and no one outside. They checked every room, every closet, every corner. He was gone. I thought that was the end of it, but this morning, I found something that made my stomach drop. On my front door, written in red, smeared like blood or paint, were 3 words, "See you soon." I didn't sleep after finding the message on my door. I spent the rest of the day packing whatever I could into a couple couple of bags. I didn't have a plan, I just knew I couldn't stay there. Every creak in the floorboards, every shadow on the wall felt like him. I called Clara and told her I needed to stay with her indefinitely. She agreed, though I could hear the hesitation in her voice. She didn't fully believe me, but I think she could sense how desperate I was. By the time I got to Clara's, it was late. Her apartment was on the top floor of a busy complex, the kind with secure entrances and cameras everywhere. If there was any place I might feel safe, it was here. We spent the evening watching movies, trying to distract me, though I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even from inside. Clara went to bed around midnight, leaving me alone on the couch. I left the TV on for background noise, but every so often, I'd glance toward the balcony door. Her apartment had a small terrace with a sliding glass door covered by thick curtains. The lock was sturdy, but that didn't comfort me. Around 2 a.m., I heard a soft tap. It was so faint at first that I thought I imagined it, but then it came again. A deliberate, rhythmic tap, 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 tap. My stomach dropped. It was coming from the balcony door. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My eyes stayed fixed on the curtain, watching for any sign of movement. The tapping stopped, replaced by the faintest sound of laughter, muffled like it was coming from behind the glass. I wanted to scream for Clara, but my voice caught in my throat. My phone was on the coffee table, just out of reach. I slowly, silently shifted toward it, never taking my eyes off the balcony door. My hand had just brushed the phone when the curtains moved. They didn't part fully, just enough for me to see him. His face was pressed against the glass, pale and grinning, with those black, empty eyes locked on me. His breath fogged up the glass as he tilted his head, like he was amused by my terror. "Let me in," he whispered. The glass shouldn't have carried the sound, but I heard it as clearly as if he were standing next to me. I grabbed my phone and bolted for Clara's room, slamming the door behind me. I shook her awake, barely able to get the words out. He's on the balcony." She looked at me like I was crazy, but the fear in my voice must have convinced her to check. She grabbed a flashlight and led the way back into the living room. The balcony door was closed and locked, the curtains undisturbed. No one was there. Clara sighed and shook her head. "You need to stop letting this get to you," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "There's no one here." But I knew what I saw. I knew he'd been there. I didn't sleep at all that night. When morning came, Clara left for work, promising we'd talk more later. I spent the day trying to convince myself it was over, that maybe I'd imagined it. But deep down, I knew better. That evening, Clara didn't come home. I called her phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. By midnight, I was pacing the apartment, trying not to panic. Then, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a photo. The image was dark and grainy, but I recognized it immediately. It was Clara, sitting on the couch in her own apartment, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Standing behind her was the man in the red jacket, his grin wider than ever. His hand rested on her shoulder like she was a puppet he controlled. The message below the photo said, "Your turn." It was a chilly Friday night, and I had just finished my shift at the coffee shop. The autumn air was crisp, and the streets were quieter than usual. I decided to take a shortcut home through a small park. It's usually well lit and always felt safe, but that night, something felt off. As I entered the park, I noticed a man sitting on a bench near the entrance. He was dressed in a dark hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face. At first, I didn't think much of it. People sit in parks all the time, right? But as I walked past, I felt his gaze on me. You know that sensation when you're sure someone is watching you. It made my skin crawl. I kept my pace steady and pretended not to notice. The path through the park is a straight shot, and I told myself I'd be home in less than 10 minutes. I just rounded a bend when I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the same man from the bench. He was walking down the path, his hood still up, his face obscured. I picked up my pace, but so did he. My heart started racing, and I could feel adrenaline coursing through me. Maybe he's just going the same way, I thought, trying to calm myself. But the park was nearly empty, and there was no reason for him to be walking so close behind me. I decided to test my theory and slowed down. So did he. I stopped, pretending to check my phone, and he stopped too, about 20 feet behind me. He just stood there, not saying a word. At this point, I was full on panicking. My apartment wasn't far, but I didn't want him knowing where I lived. I considered calling someone, but my hands were shaking so badly I was afraid I'd drop my phone. Instead, I started walking again, faster this time. I could hear his footsteps speeding up behind me. Then I saw it, a break in the bushes to my left that led to a residential street. Without thinking, I darted off the path and ran through the gap. The branches scratched at my arms, and I nearly tripped over a root, but I didn't stop. I burst out onto the street and immediately ran to the nearest house with lights on. I pounded on the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. An older woman answered, looking alarmed. "Are you okay?" she asked. I quickly explained what had happened, glancing back toward the park. The man hadn't followed me out of the bushes. For the first time since entering entering the park, I felt a small sense of relief. The woman let me inside and called the police. They showed up quickly, but by the time they searched the park, the man was gone. They took my statement and told me to be careful walking alone at night. I've taken a different route home ever since, but I still can't shake the feeling that he's out there, somewhere, waiting. The image of him standing in the shadows, just watching, is burned into my mind. I'll never forget the sound of his footsteps echoing behind me, or the way he seemed to appear out of nowhere. A couple of weeks passed, and I began to feel more at ease. The memory of that night still lingered, but nothing else had happened to make me feel unsafe. I started walking to work again, taking the long way around to avoid the park. It wasn't ideal, but I felt safer. One evening, as I was nearing my apartment building, I noticed a figure standing across the street. My stomach dropped. It was him, the man from the park. He wasn't wearing his hood this time, and I could see his face. He was expressionless, almost blank, but his eyes were locked on me. I hurried to my door, fumbling with my keys, and glanced back over my shoulder. He hadn't moved. He just stood there, watching. I managed to get inside and lock the door behind me. My heart was pounding, and I felt like I was going to be sick. I called the police again, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. They assured me they'd patrol the area and advised me to stay alert. I appreciated their concern, but it wasn't much comfort. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every noise outside my window. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. It was written in messy, almost childlike handwriting. The note read, "You're fun to follow." My blood ran cold. I immediately called the police and showed them the note. They told me they'd increase patrols around my building and advised me to stay somewhere else for a few days. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend across town, but even there, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It's been weeks now, and the man hasn't showed up again. The police have no leads, and the note didn't yield any fingerprints. I've moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city, and I've taken every precaution to keep my address private. Last night, I got my answer. I was in my new apartment, trying to settle into bed after another long day of work. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I reached for it, expecting a text from a friend. Instead, it was a photo. My heart stopped when I opened it. The photo was of me in my apartment, sitting on the couch, taken just hours earlier. I jumped up and checked every lock and window in a frenzy. They were all secure. I didn't understand how he could have taken the picture. I called the police immediately and showed them the photo. They told me to stay on the line while officers were dispatched to my location. I was trembling as I waited. Every creak in the apartment felt amplified, every shadow threatening. When the police arrived, they searched the building and surrounding area but found no sign of him. They told me it was possible he'd hacked a device or used a long lens from another building. They promised to investigate further and stationed a patrol car outside for the night. I didn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, imagined him standing outside or worse, already inside. The fear has become unbearable. This morning, I found another note, this time taped to my bathroom mirror. It read, "You can't hide forever. I'm writing this now because I don't know what else to do. The police are trying to help, but I feel like I'm losing my mind. He's always one step ahead, and I'm terrified of what he'll do next. I've started documenting everything in a journal. It's the only way I feel like I have any control left. I write down every noise, every strange feeling, every odd encounter. Maybe if I'm meticulous enough, I'll find some pattern, some clue to stop this nightmare." Today, while grocery shopping, I caught myself scanning every face in the store, looking for him. I'm exhausted, but I can't stop. Every stranger feels like a threat. Every shadow in my peripheral vision feels like him. I've taken to carrying pepper spray and a small alarm in my pocket, but I know deep down that they're just security blankets. If he wants to get to me, he will. My friends are worried. They tell me I'm imagining things, that maybe the notes were pranks or coincidences. They don't understand. I've started pulling away from them, partly to keep them safe and partly because I can't take the pitying looks anymore. How do you explain this kind of fear to someone who's never felt it? The police keep checking in, but I can tell they're losing interest. Without new evidence, I'm just another paranoid victim to them. It's infuriating and isolating. I've started sleeping with a chair wedged under the doorknob and all the lights on. Even then, I barely rest. Tonight, I'm writing from the floor of my living room where I've pushed the couch against the door. I've left the police a voicemail about the latest note, but I'm not holding my breath for a response. The only thing I'm sure of is that he's out there, watching, waiting. Hi everyone, I've never posted on here before, but after what happened to me last night, I think this is the only place that might understand. I'm still shaken, so I apologize if this comes out a little jumbled. I live alone in a small rental house in a pretty quiet neighborhood. It's one of those older homes with creaky floors and a strange layout, but it's cheap and it's mine, well rented. For context, the house has a tiny attic crawl space accessible by a panel in the hallway ceiling. I've never bothered with it because I figured it's just insulation and cobwebs up there. Yesterday evening, morning. I came home from work around 7 p.m. It was already dark, and I was exhausted. I made myself some dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed around 11. Sometime in the night, I woke up to a soft thud. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct, like something heavy had dropped onto a soft surface. I lay there for a moment, trying to convince myself it was just the house settling. Then I heard it again. Thud. This time, it sounded closer, and I swear it came from above me. My heart started racing. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and crept into the hallway. The house was dead silent except for the occasional creak of wood expanding and contracting in the cold night air. As I pointed my flashlight toward the ceiling, I saw the attic panel was slightly ajar. I froze. My first thought was that maybe a draft had pushed it open, but all the windows were closed, and I couldn't hear the heat running. I stood there, staring at the panel, debating whether I should check it out or call someone. Eventually, I decided to grab a broom and poke at the panel, hoping to push it closed. As I raised the broom, I heard the faintest scrape, like nails on wood. My blood ran cold. I backed up slowly, keeping the broom between me and the panel. That's when I saw something move, a shadow or a shape. I can't even describe it properly. It was quick, but there was definitely something up there. I bolted back to my bedroom, locked the door, and called 911. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and keep calm, but how could I? Someone or something was in my house. The police arrived within minutes, but it felt like hours. They searched the house and found no sign of forced entry. Then they checked the attic. There was a man up there. He was filthy, with matted hair and ragged clothes. He had been living in the crawl space for who knows how long. The police found a sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and even a notebook filled with bizarre, rambling notes. He didn't resist when they pulled him down, just stared at me with the most unnerving grin I've ever seen. The officers assured me he wouldn't be coming back, but I couldn't sleep after they left. I didn't go back to sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my living room with every light on, clutching a kitchen knife like it could protect me from whatever nightmares still lingered in the house. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to piece together how I could have missed the signs. The police didn't say much about the man, only that he'd likely been squatting in the attic for weeks, maybe longer. Leaks. The thought made my stomach turn. I tried to remember any strange noises, any odd occurrences, but nothing seemed out of place, at least not until last night. Except, now that I think about it, there were small things. Food seemed to disappear faster than I remembered eating it. My keys would sometimes be in a different spot than where I swore I'd left them. And my cat, Naso, she'd been acting strange lately. She'd sit in the hallway at night, staring up at the ceiling, her tail flicking back and forth. I just assumed she was being her usual weird self. But now I wonder if she knew something I didn't. This morning, I decided I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I called my landlord and told them what happened. To my surprise, they didn't seem shocked. This isn't the first time I've heard something like this in those old houses, they said casually, like it was no big deal. I demanded to break my lease, and after some back and forth, they agreed. Apparently, they'd rather lose a tenant than deal with legal trouble if word got out. As I packed my things, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. Naso stayed glued to my side, her ears constantly twitching. I tried to move quickly, but every little task felt monumental with my nerves so frayed. When I finally reached the attic panel to take one last look, just to be sure, my hands were trembling. I used the broom again, pushing it open just enough to shine a flashlight inside. The space was empty, but the smell of damp insulation and stale sweat made me gag. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Tiny holes drilled into the ceiling directly above my bedroom. Not big enough to be noticeable from below, but just large enough for someone to see through. My blood ran cold as I realized he must have been watching me while I slept, while I changed, while I thought I was alone. I slammed the panel shut and left the house for good. It's been a couple of weeks now, and I've moved into a new apartment in a much newer building. I've installed extra locks, a security camera, and even a motion detector. I'm trying to convince myself that this was a freak incident, that it's over now, but I still can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I heard a faint scrape or thud. And then there's the notebook. The police let me keep it after taking some photos for evidence. I don't know why I haven't thrown it away. It feels like some horrible talisman. Most of it is gibberish, but there's one line that's written over and over in different parts of the notebook. I didn't notice it at first because it's mixed in with the ramblings, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. She doesn't know I'm here. I can't stop wondering if there's someone else out there, watching, waiting for me to drop my guard. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. This happened about 6 years ago, and I still get chills whenever I think about it. For context, I was living in a small apartment building in a quiet town, the kind of place where everyone sort of knew each other or at least recognized faces. I was a broke college student at the time, living alone, and this was the cheapest place I could afford. One night, I got home late after a study session at the library. It was around 11 p.m., and the building was eerily silent as usual. I parked my car, walked through the dimly lit hallway, and climbed the narrow stairs to my second floor unit. As I reached my door, I noticed something odd. There was a man standing at the end of the hallway. At first, I thought he might be a new tenant or visiting someone, but the more I looked at him, the more uneasy I felt. He was just standing there, motionless, staring at me. He was wearing a long, dark coat, and his face was partially obscured by the shadows. I couldn't make out his features, but something about his stillness felt off. I tried to ignore him and quickly unlocked my door. As I stepped inside, I glanced back over my shoulder. He hadn't moved. He was still standing there, staring. I locked the door behind me and let out a shaky breath. It's fine, I told myself. He's probably just waiting for someone. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. A few hours passed, and I tried to focus on studying, but I couldn't shake the image of the man from my mind. Around 2 a.m., I decided to call it a night. As I was brushing my teeth, I heard a soft knock on my door. My heart nearly stopped. It wasn't a loud knock, just a faint tap tap tap, like whoever it was didn't want to wake anyone else up. I froze, toothbrush in hand, listening. Maybe it was one of my neighbors. But why would they be knocking at this hour? The knocking stopped, and for a moment, I thought I imagined it, but then I heard it again. Tap tap tap. This time, slower, more deliberate. I tiptoed to the door and peeked through the peephole. My stomach dropped. It was him, the man from the hallway. He was standing just inches from my door, his face pressed so close to the peephole that all I could see was his eye. I stumbled back, trying to stay silent. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grab my phone. I dialed 911, whispering to the operator about the man at my door. While I was on the phone, the knocking stopped. I looked through the peephole again. He was gone. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. They searched the building but didn't find anyone matching the description I gave them. There were no signs of forced entry, and none of my neighbors had seen or heard anything. I didn't sleep that night, and for the next few weeks, I was constantly on edge. I even borrowed a friend's dog to keep me company. Nothing else strange happened after that, but I moved out a few months later. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or what he wanted, but sometimes, late at night, I think about his eyes staring through the peephole, and I can't help but wonder if he ever came back. This happened last summer, and I still get chills thinking about it. I work late shifts at a diner downtown. Usually, I drive, but my car was in the shop, so I had to take the bus that night. It wasn't my favorite option, but it was just one night, right? I got off work around 1:30 a.m. and caught the last bus heading toward my neighborhood. The bus was nearly empty except for a woman sitting near the front, a guy in the back row, and the driver. I sat somewhere in the middle, figuring it was the safest spot. About halfway through the ride, the woman got off, leaving just me and the man in the back. He was in his 40s, wearing a dark hoodie, and had this unsettling habit of staring directly at me. I tried not to make eye contact, but it was hard to ignore him. His eyes felt like they were drilling holes into the back of my head. The bus pulled up to my stop, and I got off quickly, not looking back. I started walking the few blocks to my apartment, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. After a minute or two, I heard a second pair of footsteps behind me. I glanced over my shoulder, and there he was, the guy from the bus. He wasn't even trying to be subtle. He was about 20 feet behind me, hands shoved into his hoodie pockets, his head down but his pace quickening to match mine. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend, Sarah. I didn't want to alarm her, so I tried to sound casual while telling her someone might be following me. She told me to stay on the phone and head to her place instead of going home. She only lived a block away, so I figured it was safer than risking him knowing where I lived. I turned a corner, heading towards Sarah's building, and that's when he called out, "Hey, wait up." His voice was rough, and there was no friendliness in it. I ignored him and picked up my pace. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he yelled, louder this time. I started running. My heart was racing as I dashed up the steps to Sarah's building and buzzed her apartment frantically. She answered almost immediately, and the door clicked open. As I slipped inside, I turned back to see him standing at the base of the steps, staring at me. He didn't try to come closer, but the way he smiled at me, this cold, knowing smirk, sent shivers down my spine. He held my gaze for a moment, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Sarah let me stay at her place that night, and I reported the incident to the police the next day. They said they'd keep an eye on the area but didn't seem too concerned. A week went by, and I tried to push the incident out of my mind. I was more careful about my commute, sticking to carpooling with coworkers or taking ride shares. For the most part, life went back to normal until it didn't. One night, after another late shift, I got home and collapsed onto my couch. I was scrolling through my phone when I noticed something strange. There was a text from an unknown number. It just said, "You run fast." My stomach dropped. I immediately blocked the number, convincing myself it was just a coincidence, maybe a prank from someone who got my number by mistake. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Over the next few days, little things started happening. I'd find my trash can tipped over, my mail scattered, or a faint tapping at my window late at night. My apartment is on the second floor. There's no easy way to reach my window, but I kept brushing it off as paranoia or random noise from the street below. Then, one night, I came home to find my door unlocked. I know for a fact I locked it before leaving. I stood frozen in the hallway, debating whether to go in or call the police. I opted for the police and waited outside until they arrived. They searched my apartment and didn't find anyone inside, but one of the officers noticed the lock had been tampered with. "Looks like someone tried to pick it." He said, "Do you know anyone who might want to get in?" I shook my head. I didn't tell them about the guy from the bus. I wasn't sure if it was connected, and I didn't want to sound paranoid. After that, I had my locks changed and even installed a security camera outside my door. For a while, things seemed to calm down, and I started feeling like myself again. Then, 2 weeks later, I woke up to a notification on my phone. It was from the security camera app. "Motion detected at your door at 3:47 a.m. My heart raced as I opened the app and watched the live feed. The camera showed the hallway outside my apartment, empty and still. I scrolled back to the recorded footage and nearly dropped my phone. At 3:47 a.m., the man from the bus was standing at my door, staring directly into the camera. He didn't knock or try the handle. He just stood there, smiling, for almost a full minute before walking away. I called the police again, but by the time they arrived, he was long gone. They took the footage and promised to investigate, but I never heard back. I broke my lease and moved out of the apartment the following month. Moving to a new apartment helped me feel safer, at least for a little while. I picked a building with a secured entrance, cameras in the hallways, and even a doorman. I told myself there was no way he could find me again, but I still jumped at shadows, and every knock at the door made my heart race. A part of me couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't done with me. About a month after I moved, I started noticing little things again, things that could have been nothing but didn't feel like nothing. A folded piece of paper left on my windshield that simply said, "Hi." A cup of coffee left on the hood of my car, the lid off, still warm. And then there was the morning I found a single cigarette butt resting on my doormat. I don't smoke. I tried to tell myself it was all random, but my gut said otherwise. One night, I was sitting in my new apartment, watching TV, when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat, but I forced myself to check it, hoping it was just spam. The message said, "Do you like your new place?" My blood turned cold. How could he possibly know? I hadn't even told most of my friends where I'd moved, and I'd gone to such lengths to ensure my new address was private. I called the police immediately, but there wasn't much they could do without proof of who was sending the messages. I showed them the texts, and they advised me to keep my doors locked and let them know if anything else happened. That wasn't exactly reassuring. The final straw came 2 nights later. I was coming home from a late shift, the doorman having gone off duty for the night. I rode the elevator up to my floor, my eyes half closed from exhaustion. When the doors slid open, I stepped out into the hallway and stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting on the floor in front of my door was a small box. There was no label, no writing, just a plain brown box sealed with tape. My hands were shaking as I bent down to pick it up. I carried it inside, locked the door, and grabbed a knife to cut it open. What I found inside made me feel like I couldn't breathe. It was a bus ticket stub, not just any ticket, the ticket from that night, the one I had used to get home when he first followed me. Beneath it was a single Polaroid photograph of me taken from outside my old apartment window. That's when I lost it. I called the police, shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. They came and took the box as evidence, promising once again to investigate. But I'd heard that before. I didn't feel safe anymore, not in that building, not in that city. I packed up my things and left within a week, quitting my job and moving to a different state. I changed my number, deleted my social media accounts, and even started going by a different nickname to make myself harder to find. It's been a year now, and I haven't had any more strange messages, no unwelcome gifts, no sightings of him. I'd like to think he's finally moved on, but some nights, I still wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I'll find him standing outside my window again. Just watching, waiting. I've lived in this apartment complex for about 3 years now. It's not fancy, but it's safe, and the neighbors mostly keep to themselves. The kind of place where people nod in the hallways but don't bother to learn your name. I like that is, until I noticed something weird about the guy in 3B. I first saw him about 6 months ago. He's tall and wiry, always wearing the same baggy hoodie, the kind that hides your face in shadows. Every time I passed him, he was mumbling under his breath. Nothing unusual in a city like this. People talk to themselves all the time, but then I started hearing strange noises. My unit is right below his, so I hear the usual bumps and thuds when someone walks around. But one night, at around 3 AM, I woke up to a scratching sound, like nails dragging against the floor above me. It went on for hours. I couldn't sleep, so I banged on the ceiling with a broom. The noise stopped immediately. The next morning, I saw him in the hallway. His hoodie was up as always, but when he walked by, he whispered, "Sorry about the noise." She gets restless. Shit. I didn't think much of it until the sound started happening every night. Not just scratching anymore, dragging, low growling, sometimes what sounded like whispers in a language I didn't recognize. I was exhausted, but I didn't dare confront him. Something about him just felt wrong. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I pressed my ear to the ceiling. The noises were louder this time, and there was something else, laughter. High-pitched, childlike laughter, but it was, too hollow, like it wasn't coming from a real person. I told the building manager. She nodded, said she'd check it out, but when I followed up a week later, she just gave me a weird look and said, "There's nothing to worry about." After that, things escalated. One night, I came home late from work. The hallway was unusually dark, and light bulb must have burned out. As I fumbled with my keys, I felt it, a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around. No one was there. Then I heard the whisper again, so close it made my skin crawl. "She likes you." I ran inside, locked every bolt, and didn't sleep at all that night. The noises upstairs were worse than ever, like something was slamming into the walls, scratching to get out. The next day, I decided to leave a note for the guy in 3B, asking him to keep it down. When I got to his door, though, I froze. The door wasn't locked. It was open just a crack, and I could hear something inside. Not voices exactly, but breathing, wet, labored breathing, like someone or something was waiting just beyond the door. I should have walked away. Instead, I pushed the door open. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no lights, just bare walls covered in deep scratches. In the corner, there was a pile of shredded clothes and what looked like animal bones. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and then I saw it. In the center of the room, crouched low to the floor, was a figure. At first, I thought it was a woman, but her limbs were too long, her joints bending the wrong way. Her face was hidden by matted black hair, but I could feel her eyes on me. She tilted her head and smiled, revealing teeth that were impossibly sharp. I didn't wait to find out more. I bolted out of there and called the cops. When they arrived, the apartment was empty. No scratches, no bones, no woman, just a bare room. The guy in 3B. The building manager told me no one had lived there in years. I moved out the next week. I wish I could say that was the end of it. That leaving the apartment complex was enough to escape whatever was happening there. But some things followed you. It started small. A couple of weeks after I moved into my new place, miles away from the old one, I noticed scratches on my front door. Just little ones, almost like from a cat. I figured it was the neighborhood strays and didn't think much of it. Then the noises came back. It wasn't every night, but enough that I knew it wasn't just my imagination. The same scratching, the same drugging sound. Sometimes it was so faint I convinced myself it was just the building settling. Other times it was so loud I'd wake up sweating, clutching the baseball bat I kept by my bed. One night I woke up to something worse. I had fallen asleep on the couch with the TV on. Around 2 AM, the static from the TV woke me up. I sat up, fumbling for the remote, when I realized the air in the room felt heavy, wrong, the kind of wrong you can feel in your bones. That's when I saw it. Handprints. They were smeared across the inside of my window. Long, thin handprints, too high up to be from a child and too misshapen to be human. They were streaked in something dark, maybe mud, maybe something worse. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself it was just a prank, that someone must have broken in and I didn't notice. But I didn't call the police. What would I even tell them? The next morning, the handprints were gone. The final straw came a week later. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. That's when I heard it. A whisper, not outside, not in the hallway, in my room. It was the same hollow, too high voice I'd heard before. It was so close I could feel the words crawl over my skin. "She's coming." I froze. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it would drown out the sound, but it didn't. I could still hear it. The slow, deliberate creak of my closet door sliding open. I don't remember grabbing the bat. I don't remember running out of my apartment barefoot in the middle of the night, but I remember the look on my neighbor's face when I started pounding on her door, screaming for help. The police didn't find anything. Of course, they didn't. My closet door was wide open when they arrived, but the room was empty. No signs of forced entry, no handprints, difference? Nothing. I don't live there anymore. I don't live anywhere for long these days. Every time I think I'm safe, I see the signs, the scratches, the whispers, the weight of something watching me just out of sight. I've started to think that the guy in 3B wasn't keeping her as a pet. He was keeping her contained, and now she's free. I tried everything to get rid of her. I moved across the country, changed my phone number, even stayed with friends for a while, but none of it worked. Wherever I went, she followed it. It wasn't immediate, though. Sometimes weeks or months would pass before I noticed the first sign. The scratches always came first, small and subtle, barely noticeable. Then the whispers, then the dreams. Oh god, the dreams. They started as flashes, dark corridors, long fingers reaching toward me, her too wide grin. But the more I dreamed, the more vivid they became. I could smell the damp rot of the places she led me to, feel the icy grip of her hands brushing against my skin, and she always said the same thing: "It brought me here." I knew I couldn't keep running forever, so I tried researching anything to understand what she was. I spent hours scouring the internet for similar stories, paranormal forums, and urban legends. That's when I found it, a thread buried deep in some obscure corner of the web. Someone described an encounter eerily similar to mine. They called her the Shadow Guest. The post claimed she attaches herself to people who disturb her resting place, feeding on their fear and guilt. The longer she stays, the stronger she gets, and once she's fully manifested, well, no one knows what happens after that. The person who wrote the thread hadn't posted anything else in years. I think I know why. I decided to confront her. I didn't know what else to do. I figured if she was going to get me anyway, I might as well face her on my terms. So one night, I stayed up late, sitting in the middle of my apartment with every light off. I waited. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Just when I started to think I was being ridiculous, I heard it, the faintest whisper. "You brought me here." I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just said, "What do you want?" For a moment, there was silence. Then the air grew heavy, colder than I'd ever felt. She stepped out from the shadows, her body impossibly thin and contorted, her hair hanging in clumps over her face. Her smile stretched unnaturally wide, filled with jagged teeth. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Her voice was a rasping, guttural sound that didn't feel like it belonged in this world. "You let me out. Now, you take my place." Before I could process what she meant, she lunged at me. Her hands, those long, twisted fingers, wrapped around my throat. I felt myself slipping, the room spinning, the walls closing in. I woke up in darkness. Not my apartment, not anywhere I recognized. The air was thick and damp, the ground beneath me cold and rough. I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy, like they didn't belong to me anymore. Then I saw her, or what was left of her. She stood at the edge of the shadows, watching me, smiling. She didn't speak this time, but I understood. This was her prison, and now it was mine. I don't know how long I've been here. Days, weeks. Time doesn't mean much in this place. I can hear her, though, on the other side. She's free now, walking in my world. Maybe she's already found someone else to latch onto. I used to live in a small, quiet apartment complex on the edge of town. It wasn't anything fancy, just a couple dozen units arranged in a U-shape around a communal parking lot. The kind of place where you'd nod politely at your neighbors but never really learn their names. That was fine with me. I had just started a new job and valued the peace. One Friday night, I was home alone, unwinding after a long week. I'd just finished dinner and was sitting on my couch watching TV when I heard my doorbell ring. It startled me because no one ever visited. I didn't even have a package coming. When I went to check, no one was there. I opened the door cautiously, peeking my head out to see if maybe someone had rung the bell as a prank. The walkway was empty, and the parking lot was eerily quiet under the flickering streetlight. Shrugging it off, I closed the door, double-locked it, and went back to the couch. About 20 minutes later, it happened again. This time, I ran to the door, hoping to catch whoever it was, but again, no one. I stood there for a moment, listening. The only sound was the faint hum of the streetlight outside. Something about it didn't sit right. I turned on the porch light and checked the peephole more often, convinced I'd catch them. For the next hour, nothing happened. I started to think I was overreacting. Then, just as I was about to head to bed, the doorbell rang again. But this time, it didn't stop. It wasn't the usual ding-dong. It was rapid, frantic, like someone jamming their finger on the button. My heart pounded. I didn't open the door this time. Instead, I called out, "Who's there?" No answer. I grabbed my phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. While I was on hold, the ringing suddenly stopped. I glanced through the peephole but saw nothing. Just as I was about to hang up, I heard it, a soft scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across the door. My stomach dropped. Someone was out there. I whispered to the dispatcher what was happening, and they promised to send someone over. They told me to stay on the line. I retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. Then, my phone buzzed with a notification from my security camera app. I had a cheap doorbell camera that I barely used, but now I was glad I had it. When I pulled up the feed, my blood ran cold. There was a figure crouched just out of frame, barely visible at the edge of the camera camera's field of view. They weren't at the door anymore, they were next to my window. I couldn't make out their face, but they were staring into the glass as if trying to see inside. I told the dispatcher what I was seeing, and they urged me to stay quiet. The police were minutes away, but it felt like hours. The figure stayed there, unmoving except for their head, which tilted slightly like they were listening for something. Then, as quickly as they'd appeared, they stood up and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. When the police arrived, they didn't find anyone, but they did find something that still haunts me: scratch marks on my door deep enough to splinter the wood, and a smeared handprint on my window made with something dark and sticky. After moving out of that apartment, I tried to put the whole ordeal behind me. I threw myself into my new job and avoided talking about it. Anytime someone brought up scary stories or creepy experiences, I'd excuse myself or change the subject. But even though I left that apartment, the feeling of being watched never fully went away. A few months later, I was at a local hardware store buying some supplies to patch up a window in my new place. As I waited at the checkout counter, I overheard two employees talking about a rash of break-ins in my old neighborhood. I froze when one of them mentioned the apartment complex I used to live in. Yeah, weird stuff, one of them said, shaking his head. No forced entry, no stolen valuables, just vandalism, scratches on doors, handprints on windows. Creepy as hell. My stomach churned, but I stayed quiet and paid for my stuff as quickly as possible. It had to be a coincidence, right? I told myself I was overreacting, that I was letting my imagination run wild, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, I double-checked all the locks in my new place and even slid a chair under the doorknob for good measure. I didn't sleep much, jumping at every little sound. Around 3 a.m., just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it, a faint, deliberate knock at my front door. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, frozen in fear. The knock came again, this time a little louder. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator what was happening. They told me to stay put and that officers were on the way. As I waited, the knocking stopped, replaced by a sound I knew all too well, the soft, deliberate scraping of nails against wood. I mustered the courage to peek through the peephole, but I saw nothing. The hallway was empty, yet the scraping continued, like it was coming from inside the walls. I backed away, clutching my phone like a lifeline. When the police arrived, the sounds had stopped. They searched the building but found no signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. One of the officers suggested it might have been a prank or an animal, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They didn't believe it, and neither did I. After they left, I checked my door again. This time, the scratches weren't random. They formed a crude, almost childlike pattern, a series of X's, all arranged in a jagged line, and at the bottom of the door, smeared in what looked like dirt, was a single word: Sui. I left the apartment the next morning, staying with a friend while I looked for a new place. After that second encounter, I became almost obsessive about keeping myself safe. I bought better locks, installed a more advanced security system, and even kept a baseball bat by my bed. I moved into a larger building with more neighbors and higher security, thinking that having people around would make me feel less vulnerable. For a while, it worked. I didn't hear any strange knocks, and I didn't see any scratches or handprints. Life started to feel normal again. I convinced myself that whatever had happened was over. Maybe it was just some disturbed individual, or maybe I had imagined more of it than I wanted to admit. I told myself whatever I needed to sleep at night. That peace lasted for about 6 months. One night, I was coming home late from a work function. My apartment complex had a shared parking garage, and as I parked my car, I noticed something strange. A small piece of paper was tucked under my windshield wiper. At first, I thought it was a flyer or a parking notice, but when I pulled it off, my blood ran cold. The note was handwritten, the letters jagged and uneven, as if they were scratched into the paper. Found you. I froze, staring at the note, my hands trembling. My head snapped up, scanning the dark corners of the garage, but I didn't see anyone. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I sprinted to the elevator, clutching the note in my hand, and didn't breathe easily until I was behind the locked door of my apartment. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the baseball bat, every light in the apartment blazing, my phone at the ready to call 911. But nothing happened. The next morning, I checked the building's security cameras, but the footage was grainy and inconclusive. There was a figure near my car, but they kept their head down and their face obscured. They were there for less than a minute before disappearing out of frame. I reported it to the building's management and the police, but there wasn't much anyone could do. Over the next few weeks, small things started happening again. My doorbell would ring at odd hours, but no one would be there. I'd hear faint scratching noises, but only when I was alone. Sometimes, I'd come home to find the locks on my door slightly scuffed, like someone had tried to pick it, but there were no clear answers, just more questions and more fear. The breaking point came one night when I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone. Out of nowhere, my phone buzzed with a notification from my security camera. My heart sank as I opened the app. The live feed showed my hallway, and standing directly in front of my door was the figure. They were crouched or hiding this time, man. They stood tall, their face partially covered by a hood, but I could see enough. A wide, almost unnatural grin stretched across their face, their teeth bared like they were savoring the moment. They raised a hand and slowly traced a finger down my door. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice trembling as I described what was happening. The dispatcher stayed on the line, assuring me that officers were on their way. But when I looked back at the feed, the figure was gone. By the time the police arrived, there was no one there. No scratches, no handprints, nothing. It was like they'd vanished into thin air. I packed up the next morning and left town. I didn't even care about breaking my lease, I just couldn't stay there another night. I moved 3 states away to a city where no one knew me. I changed my phone number, stopped posting on social media, and did everything I could to disappear. It's been a year now, and I haven't seen or heard anything. For the first time in what feels like forever, I'm starting to believe that maybe it's finally over. But every now and then, I still get that feeling, the one where the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, and your gut tells you someone is watching. I've always been one of those people who avoids driving late at night. It's not that I'm scared of the dark or anything like that, it's more the eerie silence, the feeling that you're the only person left in the world. But last month, I had to make an exception. My best friend was moving to another state, and our goodbye party ran later than I expected. By the time I hit the road, it was almost midnight. About halfway through the drive, I noticed the gas gauge dipping dangerously low. I cursed myself for not filling up earlier, but luckily, a sign ahead promised a gas station just 2 miles off the next exit. Relieved, I took the turn and followed the windy road through what felt like the middle of nowhere. The station was old and run down, the kind with flickery fluorescent lights and faded signs. There was no one else around, just a single car parked near the pumps, a rusted out sedan with its windows down. The air felt thick, and the crickets were strangely quiet as I pulled up to a pump. I got out of my car, swiping my card at the machine, and that's when I noticed her, a woman standing by the sedan. She was staring at me, her long hair hanging limp, like it hadn't been washed in weeks. Her clothes were dirty and tattered, and she wasn't moving, just standing there in the shadows. "Do you need help?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. She tilted her head, like she was trying to understand my words. Then she stepped closer into the dim light, and I saw her face, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that didn't blink. She opened her mouth, and I braced myself for whatever she was about to say, but she didn't speak. Instead, she pointed behind me, toward the woods. I froze. I didn't want to look, but my body betrayed me. I turned, and in the distance, barely visible under the faint glow of the station's lights, was a figure standing at the tree line. They were wearing all black, their face obscured by a hood, and they were just watching, heart pounding. I spun back toward the woman, but she was gone. Her car was gone too, as if they'd never been there in the first place. The gas pump beeped, signaling the tank was full, and I jumped at the sound. Desperate to leave, I yanked the nozzle out and got back into my car. As I pulled onto the road, I glanced in my rearview mirror, and there she was, standing in the middle of the road, watching me drive away. I didn't stop until I was back in the city, my hand shaking on the wheel. I never saw her, or the figure in the woods, again. But sometimes, late at night, I think about her pointing behind me, and I wonder, was she warning me, or leading me into a trap? For the next few days, I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, amplified by the eerie setting and late hour. But something about it kept gnawing at me. I couldn't shake the memory of her hollow eyes, her tattered clothes, and that silent, haunting gesture toward the woods. It wasn't until a week later that I decided to look up the gas station. I wasn't even sure why. I think part of me hoped to find some rational explanation, like a history of vagrants or weird pranks in the area. But what I found was something I wasn't prepared for. The first result was a local news article. The headline hit me like a punch to the gut. Unsolved disappearances plague Route 17 gas station area. According to the article, over the past decade, at least 6 people had gone missing near that gas station. The police had no solid leads, but most of the disappearances happened at night. A few witnesses reported seeing strange people or vehicles in the area before the victims vanished, but nothing concrete ever came of it. One part of the article stopped me cold. A witness from a 2018 disappearance described seeing a woman with unkempt hair and tattered clothing at the station before the victim disappeared. The witness claimed the woman acted strangely, pointing toward the nearby woods. My stomach turned. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was the same woman, the same gestures, the same unsettling presence. But if she'd been seen before, years ago, how was she still there? And what did it make? That night, I locked every door and window in my apartment. I kept all the lights on on and tried to distract myself with movies, but my mind kept wandering back to her. Was she some kind of victim herself, stuck there as a warning to others? Or was she something darker, tied to whatever was happening in those woods? I thought the worst was over. I made it out of there alive, after all. But a few nights later, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. Groggy and confused, I picked it up to see a text from an unknown number. The message was just one word, "Rud." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. Before I could process it, another message came through. This one was a photo. It was grainy and dark, but I recognized it immediately, the gas station. My car was in the photo, parked at the pump, and standing in the background was the woman. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the next day contacting my phone provider, asking if they could trace the number. They couldn't. It was unlisted, untraceable. The messages didn't come again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still watching me. I've avoided driving at night since then. Even during the day, I stick to main roads, places where there are other people around. But sometimes, I'll catch movement in my rearview mirror and my stomach will twist. It's never her, but I can't help feeling like one day she'll be there again. A couple of months passed, and life slowly returned to normal, at least as normal as it could be with the memory of that night etched into my mind. I avoided thinking about it too much. What good would it do, anyway? But every so often, I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, checking my phone for another cryptic message that never came. Then last week, something happened that I can't explain. I was leaving work late. It had been a particularly long and stressful day, and the office parking lot was nearly empty. As I unlocked my car, I felt it again, that heavy, oppressive feeling like someone was watching me. My hands started shaking as I fumbled with the keys, and I forced myself to laugh it off. "You're being paranoid," I whispered under my breath, but as I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors, I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. Standing at the far edge of the parking lot, barely visible under the dim glow of the streetlights, was the woman. Her hair hung in limp strands over her face, and even from that distance, I could see the unnatural hollowness of her eyes. She wasn't moving, just staring at my direction. I threw the car into reverse so fast I nearly hit a light pole. By the time I turned to look again, she was gone, not walking away, not ducking into the shadows, just gone. That night, I hardly slept. Every creak of my apartment building, every gust of wind rattling the windows felt like a warning. I'd even called a few friends to try and distract myself, but I didn't tell them what I'd seen. I didn't want them to think I was losing it. The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If no one else was going to look into this, I would. I started researching everything I could find about the gas station, the disappearances, and the woods behind it. Most of it was the same vague information I'd seen before, but then I stumbled across a forum post that sent chills down my spine. The post was from an anonymous user who claimed they'd grown up in the area. They warned people to avoid the gas station, describing it as a cursed place. The part that stood out to me was their description of the woods. According to the user, people used to talk about strange lights and voices coming from the trees at night. Some even claimed the woods were home to something unnatural. Then they mentioned the woman. The post said she'd been seen by several people over the years, always appearing before someone vanished. Some thought she was a ghost, the spirit of a victim who couldn't move on. Others believed she was something much worse, a lure drawing people to whatever was waiting in the woods. I didn't want to believe it, but everything they described matched what I'd seen. And now she was here, miles away from the gas station, standing in my parking lot. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to leave, to pack up my life and move far away, but another part of me knows it won't matter. She's not tied to that place. She found me once, and she'll find me again. Last night, I had a dream, or at least, I think it was a dream. I was back at the gas station, standing alone by the pumps. The lights were flickering, and the woods seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. I could feel her before I saw her, that oppressive, suffocating presence. She stepped out of the shadows, her empty eyes fixed on mine, and for the first time, she spoke. "Don't look," she said, her voice a rasping whisper. I woke up in a cold sweat. This happened about 6 months ago, and I still can't shake the feeling of dread when I think about it. I've shared this story with close friends, but typing it out feels different, more real. I work the late shift at a diner that's about 20 minutes away from my apartment. It's a small town, so the roads are usually deserted at night. My route takes me down an old, unlit stretch of highway. The only things you see out there are occasional abandoned vehicles or the glowing eyes of deer in the woods. That night, my shift ended around 2 a.m. I was beyond exhausted, so I jumped in my car, cranked up some music to stay awake. and started heading home. About 5 minutes into the drive, I noticed a car parked on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking. I slowed down, partly out of habit and partly out of curiosity. It was an older sedan, but there was no one inside that I could see. Strange, but not unheard of out there. I figured someone had walked to get help or was hiding nearby. As I passed, something in my rearview mirror caught my attention. A shadow moved inside the car, quick, like someone ducking down. My stomach nodded. I debated turning back to check, but the logical part of my brain screamed, "Keep driving." I turned the music down and kept my eyes darting between the road and the mirror. For the next couple of minutes, it felt like every tree branch or distant light was watching me. Then I felt it, the shift of the air inside my car. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, this time at the back seat. There was someone sitting there. I slammed the brakes instinctively and swerved onto the shoulder, my heart thundering in my chest. The figure didn't move. It just sat there, completely still, its face hidden in the shadows. "Get out of my car," I yelled, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The figure leaned forward just slightly, and that's when I saw it. Its face, or lack thereof. There were no features, just a pale, blank surface. I threw open the door and bolted into the night. I didn't care that I was in the middle of nowhere. I ran until my lungs burned, glancing back only once to see my car's headlights disappearing around a bend. I flagged down a trucker about 15 minutes later. He was kind enough to call the police and stay with me until they arrived. When the officers found my car, it was parked neatly at a gas station 2 towns over. The doors were locked, the engine off, and the keys were sitting on the driver's seat. The police couldn't find any signs of forced entry or evidence of someone else being in the car. They chalked it up to exhaustion, maybe a hallucination, and let it go. But I knew what I saw. I sold that car the very next week. After I sold the car, I tried to move on. Life was normal for a while, and was too normal. I went to work, took a different route home every night, and made sure I was never in my new car for longer than I had to be. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. 2 months after the incident, I was closing the diner again. It was another quiet, uneventful shift. The regulars left early, and by the time I was locking up, the parking lot was completely empty except for my car. I made it halfway to my car when I noticed something strange, a faint handprint on the rear window. It was too large to be from one of the kids who sometimes came in with their families. The shape was off, too, almost stretched. I stared at it for a second, my pulse rising, before wiping it away with my sleeve. I tried to convince myself it was just smudges from an earlier car wash or maybe my imagination playing tricks on me. But when I got in and checked the rearview mirror, the air inside the car felt heavy again. I turned around, heart pounding, but the backseat was empty. No shadows, no faces. I laughed nervously at myself and started the engine, turning the radio up loud to drown out my anxiety. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, the station cut to static. That's when I heard it. A faint, raspy whisper. It was so soft I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it was coming from behind me. I froze, my foot hovering over the brake, and slowly turned my head. The backseat was still empty, but the whisper grew louder, more urgent. My chest tightened as I felt something cold brush the back of my neck, like icy fingers dragging across my skin. I slammed on the gas, speeding out of the lot and onto the highway. The whispering stopped as suddenly as it started, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. When I got home, I bolted inside, locked every door and window, and left every light in the apartment on. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. The next day, I went back to the diner to pick up a double shift. When I told one of my coworkers about the handprint, she gave me a strange look. "You're not the first person to say something weird happened on that stretch of highway," she said. "You know that old story, right? About the silent hitchhiker. People say if you see them once, they always come back. It doesn't matter where you go." I laughed it off, but her words stayed with me. It's been months now, and I haven't seen anything since that night, but I still don't feel safe. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of town. I've even started carpooling to work to avoid driving alone. About 3 weeks after moving, I started noticing strange things in my apartment. Small at first, objects slightly out of place, lights flickering, that sort of thing. I brushed it off as exhaustion or stress from work, but then I started waking up at exactly 3:12 a.m. every night. At first, I'd just lie there, staring at the clock and trying to will myself back to sleep. But after a few nights, I began to feel it again, that shift in the air. The first time, I thought it was just the apartment settling, but the more it happened, the more I realized it wasn't random. The air would feel heavier, colder, like the room was holding its breath. And then I started hearing it again, the whispering. It would start faint, almost inaudible, like a breeze slipping through a crack in the window. But there was no breeze, and the windows were always locked. One night, I mustered enough courage to sit up and listen. The whispers weren't random noise. They were words. ... You can't escape. You can't escape. I froze. My mouth went dry and my heart pounded in my chest. The voice sounded so close, as if someone was leaning right next to me. The next morning, I called in sick to work and started looking for someone to help. A friend recommended a local priest who performed blessings and cleansings. I wasn't religious, but I was desperate. The priest came the following evening, bringing holy water and a small, warm Bible. He walked through the apartment, muttering prayers in a low, steady voice. When he got to my bedroom, he stopped. "This room," he said, "his tone sharp. Something lingers here." I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head and sprinkled holy water in the corners, saying more prayers. When he was done, he told me to avoid mirrors for a few days and left without explaining further. That night was the first time in weeks I didn't wake up at 3:12 a.m. I thought maybe the blessing had worked, but then I made a mistake. A few nights later, I was getting ready for bed and forgot the priest's warning. I looked into the bathroom mirror. At first, I didn't notice anything strange, but as I leaned closer to turn off the light, I saw it. In the reflection, just over my shoulder, was the pale, featureless face. I spun around, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, the face was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I don't know what it is or what it wants, but I know it's not going away. I've started sleepy with all the lights on again, though it doesn't seem to make a difference. I used to work the late shift at a 24-hour diner off the highway. It wasn't the busiest place at night, but the occasional truckers or night owls kept us open. It was mostly uneventful until one night about 6 months ago. It was close to 3 a.m. and I was clearing tables. There were only 2 customers in the diner, an older man at the counter nursing a coffee and a young couple sharing a plate of fries in the corner booth. As I reached the last table near the windows, I heard the rumble of an engine outside. A sleek black car rolled into the parking lot and stopped right in front of the diner. The headlights stayed on, beaming through the windows, but no one got out. I figured the driver was probably on their phone or just needed a break. 10 minutes passed. The car didn't move. No one emerged. It was weird, but not weird enough to bother me yet. I glanced at the older man at the counter. He noticed it too, erased an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Another 5 minutes passed. Then the young woman from the booth got up and went to the restroom, leaving her boyfriend alone. The moment she disappeared down the hall, the car's headlights flickered off. I froze, rag in hand, staring at the darkened vehicle. My manager, Dave, was in the back, oblivious, so I turned to the older man for reassurance. "That's a little creepy, right?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He just shrugged and maybe they fell asleep. I decided to keep an eye on the car. I didn't like the idea of someone lurking out there. When the young woman came back from the restroom, her boyfriend stood up to leave. They paid their bill and walked to the door. As they stepped outside, the car's engine roared to life, and it reversed sharply, too sharply, out of its spot, tires screeching. I rushed to the window, watching as the car peeled out of the lot, headlights cutting through the darkness. But here's the thing, I swear to you, no one was driving it. I could see the steering wheel turning, but there was no one behind it. The young couple ran back inside, slamming the door shut. "What the hell was that?" the boyfriend yelled. By this point, the older man looked uneasy. "You sure no one was in there?" he asked, his voice lower now. We all nodded, but none of us had an explanation. Dave came out from the back, irritated by the commotion, but when we told him what happened, he just shrugged it off. "That highway's got all kinds of weirdos," he muttered. "Maybe someone just ducked down to mess with you." Except, we checked the security footage later. The camera caught the car pulling into the lot and sitting there, engine idling. Then, when it reversed, it clearly showed the interior of the car. Empty, no driver, no passengers, nothing. I quit that job a few weeks later. After I quit the diner, I thought I could leave that night behind me. But sometimes the things you try to forget have a way of finding you. 2 weeks after my last shift, I was driving home from my new job. It was a short commute, just a 20-minute drive on well-lit roads. I'd taken the job at a local grocery store, working an early shift to avoid anything resembling those eerie late nights. That night, it was raining lightly, the kind of drizzle that makes the roads shine like mirrors. I was maybe 5 minutes from home when I saw it. The same car. It was parked at the edge of a small lot next to a gas station. The sleek black paint glistened under the station's flickering lights. My heart sank. There was no mistaking it. It was the same car from the diner. I slowed down, telling myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just a similar car. Maybe I was imagining things. But as I drove past, the headlights blinked on, one after the other like eyes opening. I pressed the gas pedal harder, my knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. I didn't want to look in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't help it. The car was pulling out of the lot, slowly, like it had all the time in the world. At the next light, I turned onto my street, practically flying toward my driveway. I parked, turned off my car, and sprinted inside, locking the door behind me. For a while, I just stood there in the dark, listening. Rain tapped on the windows. My My heart was pounding, my ears straining for any sound beyond the storm. Then I heard it, a low rumble of an engine. I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. The car was parked across the street. I leaned in the shadows. Its headlights weren't on, but I could see the faint glow of the dashboard. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My voice was shaking as I told the dispatcher there was a suspicious car outside my house. They assured me an officer was on the way. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, staring at the car. I swear I could feel it watching me, even though there was no one inside. When the police arrived, the car was gone. The officer gave me the usual lines about reporting suspicious activity and staying safe. I could tell he didn't take me seriously. He probably thought I was just another paranoid insomniac. But the car kept coming back, not every night, and never for long, but enough to make me question my sanity. Sometimes I'd catch it parked at the end of my street, other times I'd see it in my rearview mirror while driving. The worst was when I found tire tracks in my driveway one morning. That's when I knew it wasn't just in my head. I started taking alternate routes home, even sleeping at friends' houses to avoid being alone. But no matter where I went, the car always found me. One night, I had enough. I decided to confront it. I was parked at a red light when I saw the car pull up behind me. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to stay calm. As the light turned green, I pulled into an empty parking lot and stopped. The car followed, its headlights flashing on and off like some kind of signal. I stepped out of my car, rain soaking my clothes as I walked toward it. My heart was pounding, but I was done running. "Who are you?" I yelled. "What do you want from me?" The car's engine revved, growling like a predator sizing up its prey. And then the driver's side door slowly creaked open. I stood frozen as the door swung wide, revealing an empty seat. The car sat there, door ajar, waiting. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then, from the darkness of the car's interior, I saw it. A shape, not human, emerging from the shadows. Its form was shifting, almost fluid, like smoke that had learned to solidify. Before I could process what I was seeing, the headlights flared blindingly bright, forcing me to stumble backward. When my vision cleared, the car was gone. You think that night in the parking lot would have been the end of it? I certainly hoped it was. For weeks after, there was nothing. No sightings of the car, no mysterious tire tracks, and no late night engine noises. I started to convince myself that maybe I'd imagined it all. Stress, exhaustion, and overactive imagination. It was easier to believe that than to think something unexplainable had latched onto me. But then last week, it happened again. I was heading home late, not from work this time but from a friend's house. We'd been catching up over dinner, and I'd stayed longer than I planned. The streets were mostly empty, the kind of eerie quiet that makes you feel like you're the last person alive. As I approached a stop sign, my headlights swept over the cross street, and there it was, the black car. It was parked at the corner, angled slightly as if it had been waiting for me. My stomach dropped, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight they ached. I wanted to turn around, to go back to my friend's house and pretend I hadn't seen it, but something inside me snapped. No more running, no more hiding. I rolled down my window and shouted into the night. "What do you want?" The car's engine roared to life, and its headlights flicked on, blinding me. I shielded my eyes and heard the tires screech as it peeled onto the road, speeding straight toward me. Panicking, I threw my car into reverse and slammed on the gas. My tires screeched as I backed away, but the black car didn't slow down. It was coming for me. I yanked the wheel, spinning my car onto a side street. The black car followed, its headlights flooding my rearview mirror. My heart was racing, and my mind was screaming at me to keep moving, but I knew this wasn't going to end until I faced it. I skidded into an empty parking lot and stopped. The black car screeched to a halt behind me, its engine growling like a beast. I got out of my car, trembling but determined. "Enough," I shouted. "What do you want from me?" The black car's headlights blinked off. The engine went silent. For a moment, everything was still, and then the car door opened. I braced myself, expecting to see the shifting, shadowy figure I glimpsed before. But what stepped out wasn't smoke or shadow. It was me, or at least, it looked like me. Same face, same clothes, same terrified expression. The thing that looked like me stood there, staring at me with empty eyes. Its lips moved, but no sound came out. I took a step back, my breath itching. "What are you?" I whispered. It tilted its head, mimicking my movements like a twisted reflection. Then it raised a hand and pointed at me. "You," it said, in a voice that sounded like mine but wrong. Distorted, echoing. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the ground. The thing stepped closer, its empty eyes boring into mine. "You invited me," it said, its voice twisting into a snarl. "When you noticed, when you followed, when you asked." I scrambled backward, my hands scraping against the asphalt. "I don't understand." It crouched down in front of me, its face inches from mine. I could see now that its eyes weren't just empty, they were black voids, endless and hungry. "You belong to me now," it hissed. I don't remember much after that. I must have passed out, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in my car, parked in the middle of the road. The black car was gone. This happened a few years ago during my summer internship at a tiny museum in my hometown. I was a history major in college, and this place was more of a glorified antique shop than a real museum. It was run by an eccentric older woman named Edith, who had lived in town her whole life and seemed to know every artifact's backstory down to the smallest detail. The museum itself was housed in an old, creaky building that used to be a courthouse in the 1800 seconds. It had dim lighting, narrow hallways, and an unsettling quietness that made the faintest noise echo. But the creepiest part, by far, was the basement. The basement was off limits to the public, filled with unorganized storage and artifacts that hadn't been cataloged yet. Edith would send me down there occasionally to fetch items for new exhibits. Every time I went, I'd get this awful feeling like someone was watching me. The air felt heavy, and there was this constant dripping sound, even though I could never find the source. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination. One day, Edith asked me to retrieve a box labeled Civil War uniforms from the farthest corner of the basement. I grabbed my flashlight and reluctantly headed down. The basement was darker than usual because the overhead light had burned out, leaving only my flashlight and a faint sliver of daylight coming from the top of the stairs. As I worked my way through the rows of dusty shelves, I noticed something odd. A mannequin, a really old one, dressed in a tattered 19th century dress, was standing at the end of the aisle. I had been in the basement dozens of times and had never seen it before. Its face was cracked porcelain, and its eyes seemed to follow me as I moved. I forced myself to ignore it and kept looking for the box. When I finally found the box, I heard a faint noise behind me, like fabric brushing against something. I whipped around, and my flashlight beam landed on the mannequin. It was closer now, maybe 10 feet away. My stomach dropped. There was no way I had walked past it. I stood frozen, flashlight trembling in my hand, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Then I heard the sound again, fabric brushing against fabric, followed by a quiet, almost inaudible exhale. That's when I dropped the flashlight. In the pitch black, I scrambled to grab it. The light flickered back on, and the mannequin was gone. My heart was racing as I grabbed the box and bolted up the stairs, not daring to look back. When I burst into the maid room, Edith looked up from her desk and frowned. "What's wrong with you?" she asked. I stammered something about hearing noises, and she rolled her eyes. "Probably the old boiler acting up again," she said. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Just be glad you didn't see her." "See who?" I asked, my voice shaky. Edith gave me a strange look. "The woman in the basement," she said. "People say she moves things around down there. I've never seen her myself, but some of the other interns swore they did. One of them quit on the spot." I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to tell me it was a joke, but she just went back to her paperwork like it was nothing. Needless to say, I didn't stay at the museum much longer. I made up an excuse about needing to focus on my studies and never went back. A few weeks after I quit, I tried to put the whole experience behind me. It wasn't easy. I'd dream about the basement, waking up drenched in sweat, convinced I could still hear that faint, rustling fabric. My parents teased me for quitting, saying I just couldn't handle a little hard work. I didn't tell them the real reason. I couldn't bear the thought of them dismissing it as a joke or worse, trying to talk me into going back. One afternoon, I bumped into Sarah, another girl from town who'd interned at the museum the summer before me. We weren't close, but we exchanged polite hellos, and before I knew it, I was blurting out, "Did anything weird ever happen to you at the museum?" Her face went pale. She didn't laugh or shrug it off. Instead, she looked around like she was making sure no one else could hear us. "You saw her, didn't you?" she whispered. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Sarah let out a shaky breath, her hand gripping the edge of the table between us. "She's real," she said. "I don't care what Edith says. That place is rug." Sarah went on to tell me her story. During her internship, she'd been tasked with organizing old ledgers in the museum's attic. She hadn't seen anything directly, but she kept hearing footsteps behind her, even though the attic was too small for anyone to hide in. Sometimes, the books she'd stacked neatly would be scattered across the floor when she turned back around. She confronted Edith about it, but Edith had just laughed, brushing it off as the building's personality. Then Sarah said something that sent chills down my spine. "Edith's been there so long, I think she's used to it. I don't think she's scared of the woman in the basement because," she hesitated, "because I think she knows her." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" Sarah lowered her voice even more. "There's a photo in the archives. It's not on display, but I found it one day when I was cataloging. It's in the museum's original staff, back when it first opened, and I swear to God, one of the women in the photo looks just like Edith. Same face, same hair, same weird little smile. The photo's from the 1940s. I shook my head. "That's impossible. She'd be, what, over 100 years old?" Sarah just shrugged. "I don't know, but I'm telling you it was her, or someone who looks exactly like her. And if that's not strange enough, guess what else was in the photo?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My heart was already pounding. "The mannequin," Sarah said. "The same one you saw. It was standing in the background, like part of the staff." After hearing Sarah's story, I became obsessed with finding out more about the museum. I started digging through local history books, trying to learn about its past. What I found didn't explain much, but it made everything even creepier. Apparently, the courthouse turned museum had been the site of a famous murder trial in the late 1800 seconds. A young woman named Martha Greaves had been accused of poisoning her husband, but the case was full of inconsistencies. Some people swore she was innocent, while others thought she was pure evil. She was eventually convicted and sentenced to hang, but she died in her cell under mysterious circumstances before the execution could take place. Rumor had it that Martha cursed the courthouse before she died. Over the years, there were reports of strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, cold spots, even full-body apparitions. When the courthouse was converted into a museum in the 1940s, the strange activity didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. The deeper I dug, the more convinced I became that Martha's spirit was tied to the building. But there was something else I couldn't shake: Edith's connection to it all. If Sarah was right about the photo, then Edith wasn't just some quirky old lady. She was part of whatever had been haunting that place for decades, or maybe centuries. I've thought about going back to the museum just to see the photo Sarah mentioned or to confront Edith about what she knows. But every time I think about stepping foot in that basement again, my body freezes and my heart starts racing. Some things are better left alone. So, to the woman in the basement, and to Edith, if you're somehow reading this, let's not meet. Ever. This happened to me about 5 years ago when I was working as a medical records technician at a small hospital in a rural town. My job mostly involved organizing patient files, entering data, and assisting with archival work. It was a quiet job, and since I was single and a bit of a night owl, I often volunteered for the late night shifts. The hospital itself wasn't too big. The main floor was the emergency department, along with a few offices and outpatient rooms. Upstairs was the medical ward, and downstairs, in the basement, was where I worked. The records department was tucked into a dimly lit corridor next to the morgue. That part of the hospital always gave me the creeps. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, and it was deadly silent down there except for the faint hum of the ventilation system. One night, I was the only one working in the records office. I had a lot to catch up on, so I decided to stay later than usual. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I started to feel it, that creeping sensation of being watched. At first, I brushed it off. It was late, I was tired, and the basement had always been unsettling. But then I heard it, a faint rustling sound, like someone dragging their feet down the hallway. I froze, listening intently. No one else was supposed to be down there. The cleaning crew usually finished by midnight, and the morgue attendant had left hours ago. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" No response, just silence. Trying to convince myself it was nothing, I went back to work. But a few minutes later, I heard the sound again, this time louder, closer. It was coming from the direction of the morgue. My heart started pounding, and I debated whether I should go check it out or call security. But curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my phone for light and stepped into the hallway. The air felt colder than usual, and the flickering lights made everything seem more surreal. As I approached the morgue, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. That wasn't right. It was always locked. Is someone in there? I called out again, my voice trembling. Still no response. Summoning what little courage I had, I pushed the door open and shone my phone's light inside. The room was empty, mostly. One of the gurneys had been pulled into the center of the room, and the sheet covering the body on it had been neatly folded at the foot of the bed. The body itself was gone. That's when I heard the sound behind me, a deep, guttural breath. I spun around, phone shaking in my hand, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone standing at the end of the hallway. Tall, unnaturally thin, and pale, their face was obscured by shadows. Then they were gone. I don't even remember grabbing my things. I just bolted upstairs to the security desk and told them everything. They sent 2 guards down to check it out, but they didn't find anything. The morgue was locked, and all the bodies were accounted for. They said I must have imagined it, that I was overtired, but I know what I saw, or rather, what I didn't see. I quit that job the next day. A week after I quit, I got a call from my former coworker, Lisa, who also worked in the records department. She was one of the few people who didn't make fun of me for leaving so suddenly. I hadn't told her everything, just that I felt unsafe. Her voice on the phone was shaky. Did you ever feel weird down there? Like someone was watching you? My stomach dropped. Yep. Why, I've been covering your night shift since you left. Last night, I thought I heard someone in the hallway outside the office. At first, I figured it was one of the guards or maybe maintenance, but when I checked, no one was there. I went back to work, but I kept hearing it. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps. A chill ran through me. Did you say anything? She hesitated. I don't think so, but I swear, when I looked down the hallway, I could feel something staring at me. me. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like I wasn't supposed to be there. I told her to quit. I begged her to leave, to just get out of there and not look back. She laughed nervously and said she'd think about it, but I could tell she didn't believe me. A few days later, I got another call. This time, it was from the hospital's HR department. They wanted to know if I'd had any issues with the basement locks during my shifts. Apparently, someone had been tampering with them, specifically the morgue door. They said the logs showed multiple entries at odd hours, but when they reviewed the security footage, it was blank, just static every single time. I asked about Lisa, but they told me she hadn't shown up for her shift the night before. She wasn't answering her phone, and no one had seen her since she left work the previous morning. My heart sank. I tried calling her myself, but it went straight to voicemail. A few days later, Lisa's car was found abandoned on a rural road about 10 miles from the hospital. Her purse, phone, and keys were still inside, but there was no sign of her. The police conducted a search, but it was like she had vanished into thin air. I couldn't shake the guilt. Maybe if I told her everything, she would have left sooner. Maybe if I'd stayed, I could have warned her, protected her. But deep down, I knew there was nothing I could have done. The hospital eventually shut down the records office in the basement. I heard they moved it upstairs, closer to the main wing. No one officially mentioned anything about Lisa's disappearance or the strange activity in the morgue, but I wasn't the only one who noticed the quiet layoffs and resignations that followed. Months passed, and I tried to move on from everything. The nightmare of those nights in the basement faded into something I could only recall in fragmented, uneasy memories. But even as life continued, I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished. One night, a few months ago, I received an email. It was from Lisa's account, but I knew right away something was off. The subject line was simply, "I'm still here." I froze when I saw it. I didn't open it right away. I couldn't. The email just sat there in my inbox, taunting me. I tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was a hacker, maybe it was spam, but something urged me to open it. I clicked the email. The message was short, but the content shook me to my core. "It's dark here. I can't move. I can't scream. I bet alone." It was signed with Lisa's name, but the rest of the email, the tone, was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. I immediately called the police, but when I tried to forward the email, it was gone. Vanished. Like it never existed. I don't know who sent that email or why, but what really bothered me was the timestamp. It had been sent just 2 hours before I received it, from a location I could not trace. Since then, I've had the same nightmare every single night. It's always the same. I'm back in the basement of the hospital, standing in front of the morgue door. It's slightly open, the room beyond pitch black, but then I hear it, the dragging footsteps, slow and deliberate, getting closer and closer. I try to run, but my legs won't move, and then I feel it, something cold, a breath on my neck, the unmistakable sensation that I'm being watched, and in the darkness, I hear her voice. "I told you, you weren't supposed to leave." Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.